Hello everyone and welcome to week one. This is Java programming. We're going to talk about arrays. Just kind of go through this. This is a lecture aspect of it. A lot will be just doing talking and the lab will be completely different. So some of our objectives for this week are declaring arrays, initialize an array, variable subscripts, declare an array within an object, search for an array through parallel arrays, and pass arrays to return arrays for methods. Declaring an array. Array is basically a named list of data items. All data items have the same type. Declaring an array variable, the same way of declaring any simple variable is insert a pair of square brackets after you type. So for example here, we have double. Double we know is a data type. And we have the brackets and we have sales figures. It just basically means that we're going to keep a value in those brackets later on. We'll talk about that. Int is an integer. It's another data type. And we declaring an array, we're saying it's ID numbers. So just remember that moving forward. So still need to reserve memory space. So as you see here, we have cell equals new double 20. So we know that new means that we're creating a new instance of that object. So it's cell is the name of the object, new double means that's the name of the variable type, and 20 is the memory space that we're using. Now as you see here, we do double, we have it in brackets, cell equals new double 20. So that just basically means that this, when we do cell and we type in cell dot whatever that value is, we can assign some type of value to it. So what's a subscript? It's an integer contained within square brackets. Indicates one of the array's variables or elements. A subscript is too small or too large for an array is out of bounds. You may get that type of message generated. And a lot of this is just me talking about this, but when we get into the lab, I'll show you the doings of how things work and so forth. So don't get nervous or upset because you don't understand this. No big deal. This is just a lecture to kind of go through an introduction, what you're going to deal with this week. The book will help out with more tutorials. The book has very good information, and the lab work will be very helpful. An array elements are numbered beginning at 0. So you can legally use a subscript from 0 to 19 when working with an array with at least 20 elements. So when working with an individual array element, treat it no differently than a single variable of the same type. So for example, here we have cell 0 equals 2100. So if you were calling that array, we know that value 0 equals 2100. And then if you had cell and you had another bracket here and had 1, maybe you had equals $450 and so forth. So you always start at 0 and work your way down. Now it says it has 20 elements. That just basically means that the array is from 0 to 20. If you use, say, 21, so you call the value and you look for what's in the array number 21 value, then that's when you're going to get that message back here where it says, right here, an error is generated because it's out of bounds, which basically means there's no value. It doesn't know what that means. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, right here is a good example of declaring an array. The first few and last few elements of an array has 20 cell figures. So each array, like each bracket holds a value in a sense. So you'll want to think about that way, like 0, 2, 17, 19, and so forth. Each bracket has some type of value. So a good example is if I was able to draw it on a board, we'd have 0 here, 1, 2, this would be 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, a variable with a reference type, such as an array, holds a memory address which is a value stored. Array names represent computer addresses, contain references. When you declare an array name, no computer memory is assigned. The array has the special value null or Unicode null. Initializing an array. Use the keyword new to define an array. An array may acquire the actual memory address. So for example, if we declare an integer, some numbers or whatever we call it equals new int 10. Each element of the sum nums has a value of 0 right here. So these guys, this guy right here has a value of 0. Now, you have char array elements assigned you, if you're using a U1000, you could do it that way. You could do a Boolean array elements, and you could do string, and it assigns as a null. Boolean automatically assigns as false, true, false value. String, it could be a null value. So assign a non-default value to an array element upon creation. So you might have int, and then the name of variable equals, you have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Those are your arrays in here. So initialization list initializes an array. Values are separated by commas and closed within curly braces. So as you see here, this array is 10 mult, and here's your values. It's an integer. So if we put in here, like, let's say we put Bob Smith, Andrew McCutcheon, Mike Tomlin, Neil Walker, those would not work. Why would they not work? Well, you're right, because it's an integer, and an integer is a number, and we can't have a string value in there, or it'll also receive some type of funky error message. Usually this is the point where I ask if anyone has any questions, but obviously you can't answer me because this is pre-recorded information. All right, so populating an array provides values from the elements in an array, or 10. Scalar, remember this, is a primitive variable. You may see that somewhere else. Power of arrays. Use subscripts that are variables that constant subscripts. So we're going to talk about loops, and we're going to go through loops as if we've already did loops. So you should have learned loops in CIT130. So I'm assuming that this is water under the bridge. So for sub equals 0, sub is less than 5, then plus plus sub. So basically what it's doing is it's saying that, hey, if the sub, the variable type, equals 0, and if it's less than 5, plus plus on sub means that sub will add an incrementer. So it starts at 0, and if the value is less than 5, then it'll go equals 1, and so forth. So score an array sub plus equals 3 if you either add it or equal to 3. When an application contains an array, use every element in an array and some tasks to perform loops that vary. Loop control variable starts at 0. Let's see here. All right, so in this example here, it says final int number of scores equals 5. So that means that, this final variable number of scores equals 5. It starts off at. Kind of skip that. Move on. Enhance for loop allows you to cycle through an array without specifying starting. All right, we're going to kind of skip through that right now. All right, so here's an example of a part of an array. This is good. So we start off our regular class here. We have our library up here. We have static void main, which is our main area. Down here we have just sort of some loops. So in this case here, we have the int score equals 0, count equals 0, total equals 0. Then we have our final, final we haven't really talked about, but it's basically a variable that has been signed. It contains some type of variable. It's a reference of an object. The state of the object may be changed by operations on the object, but sometimes the variable will always refer to the same object, which is also final, also known as non-transitivity. It mainly applies to arrays because arrays are objects, and it's a final variable that holds a reference to an array. Then the components of the array may alter based off of the array. So just remember that. So, we have the score equals 0, count equals 0, total. When we say final, quit equals 999. So that means at the end, you can't get any higher than 999. Final int max equals 10. So scanner input, output. So this is if you're doing a console and you're having them input information, which you probably learned. Let's see here. We're saying score equals input.next, while score doesn't equal quit. So if the score doesn't equal 999, then it's going to go on, and we know it's not going to go to 1000. We're going to say if it doesn't equal, let's say the scores equals 4. All right. So it's going to say scores count, and that's your variable, whatever that is, equals score. Total plus equals score plus count. Then it adds count on. So it adds numbers on count. So whatever your variable is, it adds it and says, hey, if count is equal to max, then score equals quit. Else, it'll come down here. So it's just looking, it's a lot of if-else conditions. If not, then it's going to say, hey, enter next quiz, score, or quit. So you're going to have the option to quit or next score. This is a good example to practice this week while you're learning this. I'd say take this from 8.4 in the book and write it and see what happens. And it also helps learn it. And you could mess around with the code a little bit and play around with it differently. All right, let's see here. All right, create an array of employee objects. So we have employee, EMP, call whatever you want to call it, equals new employee, 7. Must call 7 individual constructors. So final double pay rate is 635. We're saying that 4 in x equals 0, so we know it starts off as 0. And we're saying if x is less than the number of employees, whatever that number is, add plus plus x, which means this number will increase to 1. So employee x 1 equals new employee 101 plus x pay rate. So hopefully that makes some sense. And some of these things we'll go through in the labs will make more sense. Using the enhanced for loop to cycle through an array eliminates the need to use limiting value. So eliminates the need for a subscript following each element. So for employee worker, emp, which is inheriting from that system out print line, worker dot get employee number plus worker dot get salary. This is a way to create an array of strings. These are other things that we'll learn. So if you want to, like I mentioned before with McCutcheon and Bob Smith and so forth, this is an example. So you start off with string department names, and you give it a list of names: accounting, human resources, and sales. Now let's forget about the for loop for a second because we're not really worried about that. So let's say that you were coding some code here, and you want it to, you wanted to get department names. So you might have something, you might have to say department names equals, and you might say this right here. Actually, it's names, not name. I'll show you something here. Oops. All right, so what value am I going to get? It's going to be based off of how this enter. So it's going to say this is 0, this is 1, and this is 2. So let's make that 2. So how it's going to do is when you go to declare department names and hover over it and see what it means, that value is going to be accounting. And this value right here is going to be sales. So you're going to be able to use that information somehow you want to. So you might declare a new variable. You might have department names dot 0 dot toString or something like that, and that'll be your value, and your value will be accounting, if that makes any sense. All right, so determine whether a variable holds one of many values. So use series of if statements, compare the variable to a series of valid commands. So compare the variable to a list of variables. So this is the easiest way of searching an array. You set up a for int x equals 0. So it starts off at x and says if x is less than the valid values dot length plus x, else if the item order or whatever the value is equals this, then true. So it'll give you an array, and it'll sort a list of values of something, and then it'll have something. Oops, I can't type. Excuse me. True or false, whatever the value is, and they'll have that across the board, so you'll know your list of arrays. Oops. Parallel arrays. And these are all lab things that we'll learn, so don't worry about it. One and the same number of elements is another value of corresponding elements related. An alternative for searching is the loop, while loop. So a while loop, hopefully you've learned that in CIT111. Let's see if it uses a while loop. Okay, double string, enter the number of times. This one right here doesn't use a while loop yet. All right, okay. For if item, okay. In this example here with the parallel array, It's giving you final. It starts off the int. Kind of gets down to the nitty gritty right here. It says for x equals 0, x is less than the number of items. So number of items equals 10. So if it's less than 10, then if item order, whatever that value is, equals valid values. So it looks like here, item ordered equals integer dot parse int string item. So whatever the string item is, it parses it. Let's see here. All right, string item is right here. Int, and for int x number of items. If item order, okay, so then it just does an if condition. If it equals this, then right here it's doing, this is a GUI. So showing the GUI saying show message price for item is blah. So you might have this in your lab work to work with. This is your basic for and if statement. Not really going to go in that. Searching an array for an arranged match. Searching an array for exact match is not always practical. A range match, compare a value to the endpoints of numerical ranges, finds a category in which a value belongs. And we'll talk about that in the lab work. We'll show you how it's done. Here's an example. Finds a discount. Has your main string, and it's this information here. Passing arrays and returning values. Passed by a value. A copy of a value is made and used in receiving methods. Talked about primitive types. Reference types, objects that holds a memory address where the values are stored. The receiving method gets a copy of the array's actual memory address. That's kind of what I showed you with the brackets earlier. Pass array amount does a string here. It's just setting up here. It's saying this integer sum nums equals 5, 10, 15, 20. So saying there's 4 elements and those are the values. It kind of goes down the line. This will make more sense when we do the lab work because we could kind of go through it and you can see what I'm talking about. Returning an array within a method. Basically, you do it. We learned about declaring an array. We talked about initializing an array. We talked about using a for loop to access array elements, creating a class that contains an array of strings, searching an array, and passing an array of method. Don't do's is don't forget the lowest array subscript is 0. Don't do 1, 2, so forth. Don't forget the highest array subscript is 1 less than the length. Don't forget the semicolon following the closing curly braces array initialization list. And don't forget the length of an array property is not a method. Additional things to learn. Summary, talked about array names, length field, and so forth. And these are things that we'll go over better in the tutorial. And this is it pretty much. So it's pretty cut and dry. Excuse me. Pretty cut and dry on the lecture. It's kind of going through stuff. We'll go more in detail when we get into the lab work. The lab work will make more sense because we'll go back to this and say, hey, you know, this is the type of view. We're searching this, we're doing this, and so forth. And then you'll have a better understanding. So if you have any questions about the lecture, please let me know. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.